Returning to Aaron's question to you, Norman, about Israel's kind of status becoming a pariah state, I wanted to actually ask you about the recent statement made by Golan, who is the Israel Democratic Party leader. He had some interesting statements that he made on Tuesday on Israeli public radio. And Yair Golan is not just Israel's Democratic Party leader. He's also a reserve major general in the IDF and, of course, a former soldier and commander.
Israel is on its way to becoming a pariah state among nations, like South Africa was, if we don't return to acting like a sane country. And a sane country does not wage war against civilians, does not kill babies as a hobby, and does not give itself the aim of expelling populations.
What are your thoughts on this statement, this admission from an Israeli that the IDF kills children?
Well, my first reaction is a very idiosyncratic one. I was hoping somebody would pull that clip and juxtapose it next to that thing called Destiny and Benny Morris when I was in the debate with them.
For a historian, I don't want to understand Israeli society. You want to know the truth? I don't want to. I don't want to get inside their heads.
That's the problem.
90% of
a good historian tries to get into the heads of the various protagonists.
There's a limit. When 90% of Israelis think that Israel's using enough or too little force in Gaza, I don't want to get inside that head. 40% think that Israel is using insufficient force in Gaza. I don't want to get inside that head. I don't want to get inside the head of people who think they're using insufficient force against the population, half of which is children. I don't want to get inside that head.
No, you don't know Israeli pilots. They believe that they are killing Hamasniks. They're given certain objectives, and that's what they attack.
Every time they target a kid, I'm sure they believe it's Hamas.
And the issue came up of whether Israel kills children. And they laughed off the whole idea, said it's totally crazy. And I began to give examples. And each example they sought to refute. And then I gave what seemed to me the most compelling example, which was the March 2018 March of Return in Gaza. Great March of Return, it was called. The UN report, which was very thorough, ran to 250 pages, single-spaced. It said that Israel was targeting children, targeting journalists, targeting medics, targeting disabled people. When it didn't outright kill them, it was targeting them at the kneecap to give them life-changing injuries. And all of it was exhaustively documented. That thing called Destiny, he was very agitated at the claim. Benny Morris tried to distance himself, the Israeli historian. He tried to distance himself from what the March 2018, but they were both very adamant. So there was a certain relief, you might call it, on my part, when the Israeli official or opposition party official, he said what everybody knows. Israel targets the children. You might recall that Pharaoh Sidwa, the doctor who was in Gaza, he and I think it was something like 60, you can correct me, 60 other doctors and medical personnel, they provided enough evidence to convince the New York Times that children were being targeted in the head and in the chest. Then there was an uproar when the Times published that. And then the Times had no choice. It said, look, we looked at the x-rays. It couldn't reach another conclusion. So obviously it strengthens the case when this person says it, but it's nothing new under the sun. What happened in Gaza since October 2023, there's nothing new in what it's doing. What's different is the quantity. And the cliche is at some point quantity turns into quality. So you might murder an individual, but when it becomes 100 individuals, the murder becomes a massacre. And if the 100 individuals turns into 1,000 individuals, it becomes a crime against humanity. And if the 1,000 individuals turns into 1,000,000, it becomes a genocide. So at some point, quantity turns into something qualitatively different. But there's nothing new in the Israeli tactics. That to me is, for anybody who studied it, nothing new under the sun. Or I should say nothing new under the Israeli sun.
Just the newsworthiness of it is that a opposition party leader is admitting it.
Yeah, and it was newsworthy that he used the word as a hobby.
Right.
As in, not only do they not experience any remorse, but what's a hobby?
Fun.
Listen up, guys. A hobby is something you do for fun.
Right.
And that's exactly true. That's Israel. That's why, in my opinion, I'll give you just a brief preview, and you can do with it as you like. On June 9th, I will be in a public presentation with Dr. Cornel West and the former executive director of the ACLU. Her name is Nadine Strassen, a very impressive woman by any reckoning, a very impressive woman. And I will ask the question in good faith, not as a provocation. I will ask the question. The title of the event is Cancel Culture, Freedom of Speech in Gaza. And we're going to talk or focus, I hope, on the events on the college campuses and how they bear on the issue of freedom of speech. Now, if you read the Harvard reports on this alleged anti-Semitism at Harvard and so forth, everyone talks about the need for inclusion and what's called pluralism, which is, in Rodney King's famous line, "Can't we all get along?" And the job of a college, they say, the job of a college is people from diverse backgrounds, diverse opinions, contrary opinions, strongly felt opinions. Can't we all get along? Can't we be inclusive? Can't we cultivate a culture of pluralism? And as a general directive, that sounds to me right. But I do think since the Harvard report and others have focused on the Israeli Jewish students who feel shunned and are being shunned, they don't only feel it, it's a fact, they're being shunned. My view is the default setting is anybody coming out of Gaza is a war criminal. The default setting is not innocent until proven guilty. You are a participant. You are a cog in the machine of genocide. And that being the case, do we have a responsibility to make that student feel inclusive? Does everybody have a responsibility to be inclusive of that person, I have to say I have very mixed feelings about that. If one of those persons who served in Gaza came to me during office hours, I would have very mixed feelings about trying to make him or her feel inclusive. If the genocide is a national project, then everybody has to bear his or her share of culpability for participation in that project. So I have very mixed feelings about the cool now. And if you look at, there were two reports issued by Harvard, one a task force on anti-Semitism and another a task force on anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim attacks. But one thing the two reports had in common is at the end they talked about the need for inclusion and the need for pluralism and the need for figuring out how we can all get along. Well, dare I say, I don't want to get along with a genocidal murderer. I really don't. For me, it's a complete betrayal of my family history, my legacy. If most of the Germans who served during World War II, they got off for a very simple reason. That too was a national project. And if you were to prosecute everybody, you'd have a whole country in jail. So they had to be very selective in who they prosecuted. You take the worst guard in the camp in Majdanek, where my mother was there. Her name was Brigida. She was, by reputation, the worst. Everybody was terrified of her. So she went through the trial in Majdanek. It was a trial of the guards from Majdanek. It was held in Dusseldorf in the late 1970s. And my mother testified at the trial. And the testimony of her and many others was quite vivid when it came to Brigida. So Brigida gets 7 years in jail, or 7.5 years in jail. Okay? She gets out of jail. She could have attended night school. I could have taught her. Do I want her to feel inclusive? Do I want to create an environment of inclusiveness? Not really. Not really. So when the Jewish students talk about being shunned, and in particular the Israeli Jewish students talk about being shunned in places like Colombia or elsewhere, I think shunning them is the morally correct thing to do.